Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Hometown Heroes. I'm Mike Kenichi, and I'm very honored tonight because I was fortunate enough to have this individual as a teacher back in 1992 at Derby High School, and he started his teaching career in 1986, and he is currently going to enter his 36th year of education, and he is the principal at Seymour High School, and it is my honor to introduce to you Mr. Jim Freund. And Jim, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Mike. It's an honor to be here. It's considering I'm really not from the Valley and hometown hero and everything, but I've been in the Valley working my entire career. So thank you.
Right. So Jim, you grew up in Brooklyn, am I correct?
Correct. Brooklyn, New York.
So just talk about that a little bit because, you grew up in a time when, Brooklyn was so popular. I mean, they had everything. I mean, it had to be a great time to grow up in.
Well, it was interesting. I was the youngest of 8 living in the city. We lived on a dead end block. It was a nice block. It was beautiful. It was referred to as the Terraces in Brooklyn, Albemarle Terrace specifically. But I grew up at a time where the block and your neighbors and everything, where your friends were within, lived on the same street. You'd spend your time out on the street playing with the kids. Playing things like stoop ball, spud. Stick ball is actually a game that we played in the streets, and we used hubcaps, as our bases. And it was also a time when your parents really didn't hover over you. They weren't helicopter parents. We would get home from school, go outside, and we would play until it was dinner time. And our parents really didn't know where we were. But there was a lot of trust and faith in us. Play football in the street and everything else.
Yeah. And Jim, if I'm not mistaken, you're the youngest of 8 children, correct? So,
yeah.
I mean, you grew up in a big family. And I mean, that had to be a lot of fun too. Because I mean, you have a couple siblings, that's always good. But I mean, when you have 7 siblings, I mean, if you get bored of one, you always got somebody else to go to. So just talk about, growing up in a large family.
The difference between my eldest brother and myself is 11 years. So we're spread out over the time. It was, we always sat down and had dinner as a family together. So, with the 8 kids and the 2 parents, that's a lot of people. So as the youngest, often, there was a lot of, talk and everything going on. And often enough, being the youngest, I did not necessarily have the opportunity to voice my opinions as much as I would have. It was fun in the fact that we had a lot of things to do.
Yeah.
And I did happen to have the opportunity to, let's say, play with my older brothers and sisters' stuff, although they probably didn't appreciate it. I certainly had that opportunity.
Right. And Jim, your father was a neck surgeon, correct? And I believe your mother was an RN. So, I mean, was there ever a thought about you going into medicine ever as a young kid?
Yeah, my father was a chief of surgery at Brooklyn Hospital, and ear, nose, and throat surgeon. Actually, out of all of us, the hours that he used to dedicate to his profession was unbelievable. You talk about leaving in the morning and not coming back until the dark, every day, every working day. I don't think none of my brothers and sisters chose a career in medicine. I believe, observing, the amount of, not that we were afraid of work, but the amount of, just time and everything that was devoted to it was, it was incredible. And my mom was, in fact, an RN, and that's how they met. She actually started out as a coal miner's daughter, graduated from high school at a young age, and went to nursing school in Brooklyn. And that's where she met my father. Right.
Now, Jim, as a young kid, I mean, were you involved in Boy Scouts and other things like that? Because I know you definitely get into science a lot, but I mean, were you into Boy Scouts as a kid or anything like that?
Well, I tried it for a day. Again, it wasn't my thing. The middle brother, my brother Rich, was in the Boy Scouts, and he did quite a bit of that. Yeah. I wasn't necessarily I wasn't into Boy Scouts, although as an adult, when my kids were older, I did become a scout leader, and both my boys earned their Eagle eventually. But as a kid, I didn't have that exposure as much. Again, most of the playing that we did and the activities that I did in my youth were unstructured, outside, a bunch of kids, playing. So that we didn't have that kind of, like nowadays you see a lot of the kids in the youth, they have structured, and my kids went through this as well. structured soccer programs, structured football programs, structured baseball programs. That's not my experience when I was a child. It was all unstructured, kid-led, let's say.
Right. And Jim, you later, probably like around maybe middle school, you guys, your parents and you moved to New Fairfield, Connecticut, correct? Did you go to high school in New Fairfield?
Well, no. So this is so my parents, in particular, my father loved getting outdoors. So before I was born, he purchased a vacation home, a weekend home in New Fairfield on Candlewood Isle. And we would spend our weekends going there and our summer times to give us a break from the city, give us, a kind of a different experience than what we would normally get at home. So my entire life, we were commuting every weekend in 2 cars from Brooklyn, New York, up the West Side Highway to New York, to New Fairfield, Connecticut for the weekend.
Right. Right. And Jim, I know you wrestled in high school, but were you in the sports as a young kid? Or, I mean, I know you said you played stickball and stuff, but
yeah,
were you into different sports as a kid? Or?
Well, when I got to high school, I went to a Catholic boarding school in upstate New York. I believe my parents felt that, the city wasn't necessarily the best place for me. One, I didn't really like crowded areas, and 2, I wasn't necessarily an angel in my youth. So when I went to this Catholic boarding school, Mount Assumption Institute in upstate New York, the Brothers of Christian Instruction exposed me to a lot of things besides the organized sports like wrestling. Yes, I wrestled. I dabbled in football very briefly. But we had other things. We had Sunday bowling leagues. With the snow on the ground, we would have Wednesday skiing and Saturday skiing in Vermont. And occasionally we would go working on a farm. So I was exposed to a different sports, yes, but not, the structured. They were available to me, but it didn't I wasn't motivated to do that. It was really snow skiing that has been a lifelong endeavor for myself that I did quite a bit up there. And hiking in the Adirondacks, obviously. We did most of the peaks on the weekend when it wasn't ski season.
And your love for skiing, Jim, has been there forever. And I believe in 2017, you purchased a home in Vermont.
We did. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, that love has always been there. I mean, just talk about that, because I can't even imagine getting on a slope. I'd be scared to death. Tell me what's the thrill of skiing, because I know a lot of people love it.
Well, I'll tell you, when I first started, when I was about 7 years old, my gear was old at the time. I actually had leather lace-up boots with what they call spring trap bindings and wooden skis. So because they're hand-me-downs, my older brothers and sisters, and I've been skiing pretty much ever since I was 7. For me, right now, I just, I don't have anything to prove on skis. I will go out there, hit the slope, and I focus on, everything from my weight to the ski position, the slope, my body position. And it's the quietest my mind is when I'm skiing, because the only thing I'm thinking about is the slope, my body position, navigating my next turn, and everything else. It's the most relaxing thing I could actually do, to be honest with you, because of those things, because nothing else is on my mind at that time.
Right. So, Jim, it's a little unfair to ask you when you were a freshman or sophomore in high school what you wanted to be, but some kids, they have goals right away. Some, will want to get into teaching. Some will want to be an accountant, whatever it might be. When would you say that the idea of being an educator came into the back of your mind?
Well, again, my first career choice, I have to say, Michael, was at the age of 7. My parents piled all 8 kids of us in 2 cars, 1 station wagon and 1 sedan. And as the youngest, I often had the opportunity to share the back with the luggage in the station wagon. And that's how we traveled cross country. Yeah. And we visited the major parks. And it was at the age of 7, when we were visiting, I believe it was Yellowstone, I actually chose my career at that point where I wanted to be a park ranger. Right. And it wasn't until, from the age of around 7 or 8, up until an adult, I had been I was striving to become a park ranger, and particularly I wanted to be a park ranger in Yellowstone. And it wasn't until after I I went to college. I got a degree in park and recreation management. It wasn't until after I became a certified wilderness guide that I realized the next logical thought for me is, well, I want to be an interpreter in a national park.
Yeah.
So that's when I got my teaching certification in earth science, thinking that it would help me get a job in one of the greater parks.
Yeah.
And after I earned my teaching degree, I said, well, let me give teaching a shot. And it's funny. I gave it a shot. It was, I want to say it was 2 days before high school, and I was hired at Derby High School by the principal at that time. It was Tom Gers. And I went in there and I had a shot at it. So it wasn't until later in life that I became a teacher. I never intended to be there, to start or end up there.
Wow, that's crazy. I never knew that. And I mean, it's amazing. Here you are 36 years later. So sometimes what may not be your first choice ends up being your best choice.
Well, I'm still working towards that park ranger piece there. You know, I think it's still in my future at some point.
Yeah. And the thing is too, Jim, if I'm not mistaken too, around like 1990 and 1991, during the summers and weekends, you would work as a park ranger when you weren't teaching. So, I mean, you were always doing that whenever you weren't in the classroom, correct?
Yes. In the 80s, I worked as a wilderness guide for the Wesleyan University's Great Hollow Wilderness School. And I did summer trips, sometimes with juvenile delinquents. And then in the 90s, I started working, you know, I had with having children and everything else, and we needed to supplement the income. I was able to fulfill my kind of dream of becoming a summer park ranger at Hopbrook Lake up in Middlebury.
Right. Yeah.
And so when I would pack up my books and leave Derby High School, I would then sometimes I'd change into my uniform, my park ranger uniform, in Derby High School and drive to the park and do the late afternoon into evening shift. So that was I love doing that. That was a fun thing to do, working in the park.
Yeah. And, you know, Jim, you just touched on it, but, you know, I think sometimes people, they get this idea about teachers and, oh, they got the best life. They get summers off, this and that. But mostly, you know, most of you work during the summer because, you know, like you said, you have to somehow, you know, supplement that income. So, I mean, you never had a summer off, really. No,
summer is for me, it's always, you know, either I was working or if my wife were working, I was at home taking care of the children. And, you know, taking care of children, either you're paying somebody to do it or you're doing it yourself. And it's not necessarily easy when I have 3 kids at the time, you know, so it wasn't, I still do. It wasn't that easy. So we were always, you know, Kathy, my wife and I, were always supporting each other in the summertime to get that done. Right.
And Jim, let me ask you this. Where did the love for science while you were in college develop, or more so as you got more and more into teaching it? Because, I mean, you were an outstanding science teacher, which we're going to get to, but I mean, did you have that passion for it? I mean, like, you always seemed like you enjoyed teaching it. So I think there was always a passion outside of the classroom for science as well, correct?
As long as I could remember, I've been passionate about science probably since when I was 7 years old. I love science and I love the outdoors and I love nature. It's been a lifelong passion of mine, and it still is the source of my primary reading. But it's just something. It's always been it's always been my favorite thing to study, to learn about, and to share.
So Jim, you talked about how, you know, you got your first teaching job in Derby. Tom Gers was the principal. Yes. You know, you came at a time in 1986 where, like, it was a who's who of just outstanding teachers, outstanding people, you know, Rich Lavery, who we'll get to in a few minutes, Joe Borzelli, Norman Middendorf, Charlie DeCenzo, Ann DeCenzo.
Fantastic.
You know, so many great people, just Kathy Brown. I mean, just talk about what that first year was like for you at Derby High, because I'm sure being a guy that wasn't from Derby, not from the Valley, those people really made your first year of teaching like you were part of the family.
I could still tell you about the first day. The first day was just the most exciting thing to walk through the halls, and having, before school started, the buses are letting off and the kids are wandering the hallways. Just absolutely thrilling. My first challenge in Derby was that come with my being a wilderness instructor, where you're out in the woods with kids and they call you by your first name. I started out my first classes having the kids call me my first name and my last name. And that was kind of taboo. And I know I added quite a bit of gray hair to Mr. Lavery's head throughout my first opening years, not only for things like that, but also, learning the craft of teaching, which is a challenging craft. I just had a conversation earlier today. It takes at least 3 years just to kind of understand this. There's no such thing as a ready-made teacher. You have to learn.
Yeah.
And I'm very fortunate to learn from what I consider some of the best educators I've ever worked with, including Mr. Lavery, and I had Joe Borzelli there, and I had AJ Dubriel there.
Yeah.
And, Olympia Orzetti or Flip was there down the hall. The science at the time was in this one section. And then, of course, the DeCenzos were incredibly supportive throughout my entire tenure in Derby, both Charlie and Ann.
Yeah. And, Jim, let me ask you, what would you say in that first year was the most challenging thing for you as a new teacher in the school? Now, number one, they were very known for like their football program, which kind of dominated the school a lot. It was like, you were part of something big. So just talk about that first year, and what would you say was most challenging for you?
The most challenging was the classroom management and getting the kids to pay attention, because, you're a young person, you're going into a school, and, the students look at you. It's kind of like a challenge. Oh, here we have a new teacher. Let's challenge him. And I went from actually kind of that. I had to evolve as an educator. And for a period of time, I went from kind of really, not having a firm understanding of classroom management to becoming really strict, which wasn't good, until eventually come to the understanding that the kids need to see me as a person and I see them as a person, so that we could work together. And it really, my whole teaching career got so much better when I developed that understanding and the passion for the kids in front of me, and understanding that, every child has a different background, a different upbringing, and carries different baggage with them. And for me not to recognize that and understand that and support them with that, I really wasn't doing my job. That in turn paid back tenfold in, the students, respecting me and, not necessarily giving me a hard time, although there were a couple, and kind of developed more of a collaborative environment for the kids. They need to know that you're there to support them. They're not just there to control them, I guess.
Right. And, Jim, we talked about him briefly a few minutes ago, but you were fortunate the first 8 years of your teaching career to learn under Rich Lavery. He was the chairperson of science, and
he was my mentor. Yeah.
Yeah. He really taught you a lot. And I know, like you had mentioned, when he retired, and you took over for him when he retired, you went from earth science to biology.
Correct.
You even mentioned for a couple of years that, you really missed him, because you could always go to him when you were unsure about something, and he was always there to teach you. So just talk about the impact that Rich Lavery had on your teaching career.
I mean, he was, if not one of the most influential people in my career. He was always, he was stern.
Yeah.
He would tell you when you did something wrong. And sometimes he wouldn't even have to tell you. He'd look at you. He would make a grumble. But he was also very supportive. And it was always very incredible to me when I would go and observe him, to see kind of what a young guy, he was in just the way he related to people. I mean, I was in one of his biology classes once, he was doing the cardio, the cardio, the heart, studying the heart and everything else. And out of the blue, he pretends like he's having a heart attack. And, he literally hits the deck in the front of the classroom. And I'm sitting there in the back and like, oh my God, what's going on? Yeah. And the students are doing the same thing. And then the next thing he jumps up and he goes, what are you going to do? You're not going to do anything to save me? So he had an element that was very funny as well. And the students used to refer to him as slavery, because he made the students work. But that work is, what gets you places in life. So he was quite an educator. I was very fortunate to work under him. He evaluated me. So.
Right. And Jim, the first like 5 or 6 years of your teaching career, you taught mainly earth science, basically to eighth, ninth, and 10th graders, because Derby had a middle school and the high school, and those eighth grade kids took earth science as eighth graders. So just talk about teaching earth science. I mean, you did that. What would you say was the difference between earth science and biology, and which one did you prefer teaching more of?
Well, I love earth science, and there's no question, whether it be oceanography, astronomy, meteorology, geology, and it still is actually, I would say, is my passion. Although I had a firm understanding of biology because, I grew up with my brothers and older brothers and sisters, and, I was exposed to dissecting animals, before I probably should have been dissecting them at home. I had my own dissection kit, and we'd order animals from wards, and I was probably in middle school at the time. But I think the greatest difference in biology is, you're dealing with a much more, it's hard to say. I love biology as well. It's an awfully diverse field, and it covers a wide range of everything from genetics to cellular functioning to, ecosystems. I actually love both of them, although earth science is my true love. I've also enjoyed teaching biology and being that science geek, who eventually was able to, bring me to administration, which is surprisingly enough.
Right. Jim, let me ask you this, because, one of the things that people don't realize a lot, too, is that as educators, teachers, you have a lot of stuff you have to do outside of the classroom. You have to prepare lesson plans for the next day's class. You got to prepare, homework throughout the week for each week.
Mm-hmm.
You've also got to, like I said, have a lesson plan, stuff like that. That's very important. So let me ask you, how much work would you say you'd have to put outside the classroom a week when you were teaching?
So just absent of the grading and actually writing the lesson plans, when you first start, you study, you learn. I don't think you really know a subject until you've had an opportunity to teach it, because regardless of, you could sit in a class and get A's in that class and you think you know it, but when it comes time to then share that knowledge with other people, you realize, I don't really know this. So for me, I always found that if I were starting a new class or a subject, I would probably spend, at least 2 hours a night just studying for the next class, so I sounded knowledgeable and had a footing in the subject area. As it goes on, that diminishes a little bit, but you still have to refresh it, because you think about the content knowledge that a teacher has to depart or share with their classes. It's huge. So, I always found that I had to study my subject on a regular basis, so it would be fresh. And also, as things changed and as new theories came out, new discoveries, I wanted to integrate those into my lessons. The grading is interesting, because throughout, when I first started in teaching, it was fairly common to give multiple choice assessments, true and false assessments, short answer assessments. And while I was teaching, it evolved to, more, writing and critical thinking and application of knowledge and written documents. And, that takes a long time. So the teacher's job is never done at the end of the school day. There's at least several hours every day that they have to devote to it. And most of the teachers I know spend quite a bit of their Sunday times getting ready for the week. They'll spend, several hours on a Sunday to get ready.
Right. Jim, let me ask you this. In 1992, towards the end of the school year, there was an issue going on with Derby where, they were going to have to eliminate some positions, and your position was almost eliminated. And you talked about this guy momentarily as one of the teachers that you worked with. And he really did something very nice so that you can continue your teaching career. Just talk about that a little bit.
So at the time, there was always a budget crunch, and there was always a threat of teacher eliminations. Every year I received a letter saying that, unfortunately, your job may not continue or be there next year. It was probably around 92 where it got to the point where it was basically it. They were going to eliminate my position. And there was a senior member of the department, Alipio Orazzetti or Flip, who
Yeah.
was, at that time. And the way I understand it is understanding he knew that my job was going to get cut. And at that point, he decided to retire. Although he probably had a couple more years in him, he decided to retire to preserve my position. So I owe a lot to him for that.
Yeah. And, that just goes to show, too, Jim, that, talk about how, people could be unselfish sometimes. He only knew you for a few years and he was going to teach a couple more years, but he saw that you're a young teacher and your first son, Dylan, was born that year as well. So
Yeah.
you just had your first child born. So he looked at it as this guy's starting a family. It's time for me to step aside. And that's really, just an unbelievable thing that he did. And one, I'm sure that you've never forgotten, obviously.
No, absolutely not. I owe him a lot, actually. Unfortunately, he died too young, but I certainly do owe him quite a bit.
Right. Jim, let me ask you, you were always involved, not just in the classroom, you were always involved with the students outside the classroom. And you took it upon yourself in 1993 to become the advisor for the class of 1996. You did a lot of great things with that class, and that class never forgot what you did for them. And in 1996, they decided to dedicate their yearbook to you for all you had did for them. As a teacher, I know, they always say you can't be the kids' friends, and that's true, but you still want to be there for these kids. And when you see them do well, it's very rewarding for you. So for them to appreciate what you did for them and, choose you to be the dedication for their yearbook, that had to feel very good for you.
Well, honestly, for me, it still gets me choked up just like right now talking about that. It's probably the greatest honor I've ever received is when a class recognizes you, an educator. Myself, it's probably the greatest honor any group of students could have bestowed upon me was to dedicate a yearbook to me. I was, and it's still, like I say, it still gets me choked up a little bit. It was awesome. The greatest honor that any teacher could receive is the accolades of their students.
Right, and it stays with you forever. That was almost 30 years ago, and yet you could probably still remember students from that class. You have that bond with them because you were their advisor, and you worked closely with that group for 4 years.
Yeah, it's I've seen a lot of kids over the years, so no, it was quite an experience, and I'm very grateful to the group. And it teaches you a lot. I always say in order to get something, you have to give something. And in the classroom or to a class outside, whether it be extracurricular clubs or coaching,
right.
You got to give something back to the community, and it will always give you something in return, in my experience.
Right. And Jim, in 1995, you started a new program at Derby. You started the Science Club, and right away you had a group of kids who joined that club. And it was funny too, because you had some kids, I remember, that you wouldn't think were in the science, and they joined that club. So, I also think too, Jim, that was, a reflection on you because they liked you as an individual. So they said, you know what, I'll give it a try. But that Science Club really took off. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, we had fun. First of all, whoever designed Derby High School originally did a terrible job because they built the greenhouse on the basement floor that was facing east. It literally only had, and there was huge trees out there, so it had zero sunlight. But we used that to grow plants and learn how to propagate plants, and ultimately we'd sell them to make money, and we could buy other things buy things for the science department. It was a fun club. There was a lot of activity there, and I think at the time the students needed something more, than just that. They just like just sports or like your regular club activities. And prior to that, I did try to run a meteorological club out of GO1, and that was fun as well. But it's I think they needed more. I know the science club, like right now in Seymour High School, is very popular as well. Because there's just some geeky kids out there that like to do things like that, and they might not necessarily recognize their inner geek at the time. And I mean that with all the geek is a compliment as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Jim, 1999 comes around, and you decide to leave the classroom for a few
Yeah.
years, and I believe you worked closely with the superintendent. Just talk about how
So,
you decided to change. Not, I wouldn't say careers, but you decided to leave the classroom in 1999, and I think you were the head of curriculum, correct?
yeah, so well, this the whole story behind that's pretty interesting, and I do owe a lot in reference to Anna DeCenzo at
Yeah.
that time, who was kind of mentoring me a bit. But that was before, Derby High School was networked. And I happened to, ever since I started in Derby in '86, I had a computer. I had a portable computer that I would bring with myself, and that's how I maintained my grades and would do my writing. So it was in the late '90s, I had noticed a lot of computers being disposed of by IBM at the landfill.
Yeah.
So I gathered probably 4 or 5 of those computers, and I brought them into Derby High School, set them up in my classroom, cleaned out the hard drive, and I had a niece who was also programming and for Microsoft, and and I from her I was able to buy a software package called NT 4.0 with terminal services, and I networked those computers in my classroom to share one dial-up connection to the internet.
Right.
Because at the time, I think Derby High School had like 5 dial-up connections. I was fortunate enough to have one in my room, thanks to Anna DeCenzo. So the superintendent came into my classroom once, and that was Dr. Nathan Chesler, and he observes like these kids are working at these computers. Like, where'd you get the computers from? I said, the town dump, the landfill. And he goes, well, what are they doing? I said, well, they're connecting to the internet and they're sharing this one CD-ROM drive. And he's like, well, how'd you do that? And I said, I just did it with software. And it was actually from that was my step into administration. And in 1999, I was a part-time kind of curriculum instructor, but that was curriculum, director of instruction and curriculum. But at that point, they really needed for the technology integration into the schools.
Right.
But then at the same time, Anna DeCenzo was working with ACES and James Van Pelt to write several grants so that we could network Derby. And so they needed my support at that point. One thing led to another. We got gobs of money. Derby High School was networked, and computers were brought into every classroom. And that was really the start of my career. And in 1999, I was part-time. Yeah. And 2000, I went full-time director of instruction and technology. So
right. Now, let me ask you, obviously you enjoyed implementing that, but did you enjoy those like 4 or 5 years, or did you miss being around the students?
I enjoyed it in the beginning, and the grant writing was always challenging for me, but I would hack through with that. And of course, we would sometimes bring in outside grant writers. Professional development actually is probably one of the most challenging things to do for an entire, K through 12 faculty. But what I realized is I didn't get into education to sit at a desk and write things. I got into to work with people, and in particular, kids. I still like clowning around with kids. They're fun,
Yeah.
And I miss that. So it was in about 2004, I started looking for jobs that would give me the opportunity to work with kids directly again.
Yeah. Now, Jim, let me ask you this. Obviously, you've worked with so many kids over the years. I'm sure that probably helped you a lot in, being a father, in the sense that you could relate to how kids are. But, there's 4 special people in your life that will always, be your biggest fans. Obviously, your wife, Kathleen, your oldest son, your sons, Dylan and Spencer, and then, of course, your daughter, Casey.
Yeah.
And, basically, a good amount of the, your early on teaching career, that's when, they were born into the world and stuff. So, I'm sure teaching and relating with kids helped you relate to them as they got older as well.
I'm sure, I think it goes both ways. Yeah. I don't, when I went from not being a parent to being a parent, that totally changes your view of the students in front of you, because until you're a parent, you don't really know what it's like. And when you become a parent and you're working with kids on a regular basis, you start looking at them differently. you start looking at them with the the eyes of a parent. And having children actually influenced my interaction with the students that I worked with, as well as their families. It was incredibly meaningful to me, and it works both ways. You know, it's hard, when I would, but it was having kids was very impactful on my interaction with my own students in the classroom, and just trying to understand their backgrounds and things of that nature.
Right. And, Jim, when your son Dylan was born, I remember, it was probably maybe 6 months after he was born, somebody had asked you one day, are you going to make him play sports? Are you going to make him do this? And you always said this, which I thought was really, told a lot about who you are as not only a father, but a person, is you said, I'm never going to, discourage him to do anything. But the one thing I'm always going to encourage him to do is read. And you were very big on, that you wanted more than anything else, your children to always challenge themselves, and you always wanted them to never be afraid to read. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, no, I mean, obviously reading, I myself personally had difficulty reading in my youth. And I had received assistance for that quite a bit in elementary school. So for me, it was important, because that's how you gather information. And, I've always encouraged my kids to read things that they're interested in. And I'm also a firm believer of reading materials that interest you. So if you don't like reading, fiction, then read nonfiction. Vice versa. I myself much prefer to read nonfiction versus fiction. Yeah. And I think all of our kids at home, had lots of opportunities to read, and it was their choice. We weren't telling them what to read, but as long as they were reading something that interests them. And ultimately, I believe that it's good for the development of anybody, really. Right.
And Jim, it's hard to believe it went by so quick.
Yeah.
I think your youngest child is 24 years old now. Your daughter.
Yeah, Casey's getting old.
Yeah. And here's the thing.
Someday she's going to be older than me. Catch up.
And here's the thing. You got to be very proud, because all three of them are doing great things in their life. Yeah. All three of them have gotten college degrees. And I mean, they have done so many great things. They've challenged themselves. I think your son's moved out of state. They've kind of, taken a different type of leap. And Casey's doing great things. I believe she's in Newtown.
Yes.
Doing great. She's emergency room and ICU veterinarian, right?
Veterinarian, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, the three of them are doing unbelievable. And you and your wife, Kathleen, just have to be beyond proud of these three individuals.
Oh, but yeah, we're incredibly proud of our kids. I mean, they all kind of, just grew into these, wonderful people. Of course, nobody's perfect, but don't get me wrong. But Dylan is a biomedical engineer. Spencer is a materials engineer, and Casey a vet tech. So, they all are hard workers. And it wouldn't be right for me to take credit for that fully. My wife is incredible in raising our kids. And she was really the driving force behind their development. I'm just kind of there, so to speak. But they really developed into fine people that we're incredibly proud of. And it's too bad we don't see them enough. But that's what happens when you get older.
Right, and your wife is also an educator, and I mean, she's taught for many years, and like you said, she's been like your biggest supporter without a doubt. And I mean, your biggest fan. And I mean, she's just, like you said, she's really been the glue that's kept everything together.
I would never be here where I am right now without her, to be honest with you. The encouragement and support, because when you become an educator, you always have to go to school, because you need to get your master's degree, then you need to get your 6-year degree in X, Y, and Z. And in order to do that, you need somebody to take care of everything else. And she's not only been there to take care of everything else, but she's been there all along to encourage me and to, allow me to take on the responsibility that I currently carry. Even now, as the building principal, once the school starts and we're going, I'm out 2 to 3 nights a week at school. So I'm there from the morning to late at night. That just doesn't happen in a lot of situations. But Kathy, supports that and supports our family. And again, she's kind of the real brains behind this operation.
Right. So Jim, let me ask you this. I know by 2004, a lot of the Derby teachers had retired that you worked with. So it was a different type of group, but you spent 18 years there. I mean, was it bittersweet to go to Seymour? I mean, we'll get to Seymour in a sec, but I mean, it had to be kind of hard to leave Derby behind after 18 years.
As you know, I there weren't opportunities for me in Derby at the time to get back into the buildings to work with the kids. And
right.
at the time, Marianne Mascolo, who actually is a Derby graduate, if I'm not mistaken, was the associate superintendent or assistant superintendent in Seymour. And she had called me on several occasions to apply for other positions in Seymour. And, the third time's the charm. I applied for the director of instruction position there. Then I applied for the middle school principalship there. And then eventually I applied for the high school assistant principal, which is actually the place where I should have, that was the right fit.
Right.
And so I was invited to interview there. And when it's funny, when I interviewed, one of the questions they asked me is, well, where do you see yourself, where do you see yourself going in your career? And my response was, well, I want to be a park ranger, going back to the start of the story. And that actual line I was told later is what got me the job, because not only did I want to be a park ranger, but apparently so did Mr. Voloshin, the principal at the time, wanted to be a park ranger, and it was an instant connection at that point. And so you never know, you never know where life is going to take you.
You know what's crazy about it, though, Jim, is like you said, teaching wasn't really on your radar when you got out of high school. It wasn't really on your radar when you entered college. And then not only do you become a teacher, but here you are in 2021, and you're going to enter, I think, your 7th year as principal at Seymour High School. Yeah. So, I mean, I doubt you ever thought about being an administrator. And I mean, it's just crazy how life works out sometimes. And I mean, I'm sure you have no regrets. It's just been an unbelievable career.
Can't live with regrets. You always have to look towards the future. I've always believed this, Mike, windows of opportunity open up to people. Step through them. Don't hesitate. You have to step through an opportunity and not regret that opportunity once you've taken it. I've just, my life is just a long series of opportunities I've taken advantage of. And I encourage anybody to do that. If there's a promising position or a promising opportunity for you, then take advantage of it. Just don't shy away. Be bold. Don't hide.
Yeah. And, Jim, you've had a lot of different, over the years, curriculums changed. I mean, there's different things, but nothing was more difficult for you and every teacher and principal in the state and in the country, for that matter, than what occurred in February or March of 2020, when you guys had to leave the classroom and everything had to be virtual. And I mean, basically you had to do that for a whole year. Just talk about how rough that was and how you and your fellow, teachers got through that, and just talk about that experience, because that was very tough for everybody.
Well, I think any teacher and all teachers are absolutely incredible. I think that, think about it, teachers became teachers because they wanted to work with kids. And usually you envision a classroom, a nice close network, conversations, communication. And suddenly we're telling teachers, now, whatever you envision teaching was going to be like, it's going to stop now, and you're going to have to teach through a laptop, and you're going to have to do this, X, Y, and Z. And they did, not only in, I'm sure, Derby, but in Seymour, they did fantastic. But nationally, teachers very rapidly evolved into this new kind of situation. And it's incredibly impressive. It's not like you're doing a remote meeting with business partners. You're being charged with teaching kids subjects that they might not necessarily be thrilled about remotely, and keeping them involved and keeping them engaged. And it was just absolutely impressive, the amount of work the educators did across the country and in every classroom to get through that. And, here we are entering a school year where we're hoping to be as normal as possible. And I can't help but think that every single teacher that went through that is that much stronger now, that much like almost a better teacher because they lived through that diversity. And we have to do it again. It will be relatively easier. But the teachers, it was incredible. We miss the kids greatly. So today we had freshman orientation at Seymour High School, and that was thrilling to see the kids there. I always refer to the students and the teachers as the life and blood of the building, the school, because without them, it's just a hollow shell.
Right. Yeah, it definitely was difficult. And I mean, really, educators everywhere, administrators everywhere should be applauded because, really, they did so well under such, unbelievable circumstances and unfortunate ones. And that's really a tribute to all of them.
Yeah, they did a fantastic job.
Right. Jim, let me ask you this. You worked for 3 principals at Derby, Tom Gers, Mike Angelini, and Charlie DeCenzo. And obviously, I would say more towards Charlie's career end and you got involved in administration, but really not with Mike or Tom. But do you take any from the 3 when you're a principal today and use anything you learned from them over the years?
I've probably taken more from Charlie DeCenzo than anybody else. One of the things that he did, and I've incorporated into my graduations, is he used to, when the graduates are sitting on the field at graduation, he used to ask students, everyone who's served in the student council, stand up and be recognized. And he would go, whoever wants to play football, stand up and be recognized. And I thought that was like a fantastic thing that he used to do. And now that's part of my graduations up in Seymour.
Right.
What I think the greatest lesson that, and I'd have to say this came from both Charlie and Ann DeCenzo, is that as a principal, as an administrator, it's not a job. It really becomes a way of life. If you approach it like it's a job, you're not going to be that successful. If you engross yourself in it like it's it's your life, it's your way of life. You have to look at the kids in the building as your kids because you have to advocate for them. You have to fight for them. If you embrace a profession as a way of life and you understand that truly, it becomes that much more rewarding and actually enjoyable. So I would have to say that of all of the principals I was a teacher under, it would be Charlie DeCenzo and, of course, Anna DeCenzo with all the support that she gave me at that point in my career.
Right. And, they were really great for Derby and did so much for Derby and, not just the school, but the town as well. They were really, they were Derby people through and through. They really
they are there. There you go. There's your hometown heroes right there, both of them.
Right. So, Jim, let me ask you, you've taught at both schools and obviously there's a piece from both schools that'll stay with you forever. But just talk about what Derby and Seymour mean to you because, both schools are in the Valley. So pretty much a guy who never grew up in Connecticut or the Valley, you really can consider yourself a Valley guy now.
I do.
Yeah,
I do. I again, so if we go back and kind of circle back to part of our discussion, as a kid growing up in Brooklyn, I was spending every summer and weekends in Connecticut. So whereas other people living on my block spent their weekends with each other. So the friendships and relationships were so much stronger with the people that kind of stuck around the neighborhood as compared to us that left. Then when I went to high school, I wasn't going to school in Connecticut or Brooklyn. I was going to upstate New York for the Catholic boarding school. So, and then college, and then I was all over the place. So one of the things I believed I lacked was a connection to a community. I lacked that my entire upbringing because the nature of constantly shifting from one place to another. And now I could say I'm 35 plus years on the profession, and I've only worked in 2 schools that are probably less than 8 miles apart.
Yeah,
in the lower Naugatuck Valley. And I have in Seymour, I have the children of students I had in Derby. And I see people, I try not to miss a Seymour Derby football game. And I see people from Derby and Seymour. And, you know, like when the community of Derby loses somebody like Dutch Pereiras, I feel that because also he worked with our softball girls, you know,
Yeah.
under Ken Pereiras and Seymour. And there is just all this overlap, you know. A couple of years ago, I was at a football game, and I had the opportunity to get a picture of Coach Sponheimer and Coach DeCenzo on the sidelines. You know,
Yeah.
Charlie was in his red, and Paul Spooney was in his blue and golds. And I remember taking the picture and sending it to Anna DeCenzo and saying, "Two old foes," and her response was, "No, two old friends." And I
Yeah.
think that being part of this community for so long and developing those connections to the community and the people, that's an incredibly rewarding aspect of my work, which I didn't experience at any other time until working in the Valley. Even like you, come on,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's so, I mean, for me, that's very rewarding. And again, although I'm not from the Valley, and although, you know, I've worked here my entire career and I feel incredibly connected to the community.
Right.
Occasionally, you know, I have the occasion to go into Derby High School. Every time that's an experience for me. I love going there. I saw you a couple of years there.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first time I seen you in years, and I mean, you
Yeah.
know, it was just great to see you. Jim, let me ask you this. As good as you are in the classroom, I hear you're pretty good with the guitar outside of the classroom. You're an avid guitar player. Just talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's, you know, what I feel it's critically important for anybody, and much the way I said snow skiing, when you're skiing, nothing bothers you. Everything's an escape.
Yeah.
For me, because you need to relax at night. You can't keep the worries of work on your mind all the time. So at night, I play the guitar. I've played it actually since I was a teenager, but when the kids were growing up, I played it less kind of, but you know, actually since COVID started, I play just about every night. It's just an escape. There's nothing else on my mind other than the next note, the next chord. We have a guitar program in Seymour High School, and this summer I spent some time repairing a guitar. Never did that before. I mean, to the point where its neck was snapped and everything else, but that was also fun. Who knows? Maybe that'll grow into a hobby.
And you know, Jim, one of the things that you do for exercise, which I think is pretty cool, is you split wood. You know, that's not easy to do. So, but that's a heck of a workout. I mean, just talk about that.
Well, all right. So ever since for the last 30 plus years, I live in a house that's heated by electricity. So we've been heating it or supplementing it with wood heat all that time. And up until I became a principal, I split all that wood by hand with a hand maul. And when I became principal, I just didn't have the time to do that. And I actually have a log splitter, but I still have to lift the logs. And, you know, one piece of wood is actually carried like 4 or 5 times. So there's a lot of exercise involved in it. But I do, and I have always supplemented. And wood is my primary heat source, I'd say, and the electric supplements it. So it's a hobby. I love splitting. It also is an escape. And again, I think it's really important for us to have separate parts of our lives and that like wood splitting for me is for me, you know, it's for heating the house, but that time is for me also to kind of, you know, think and to process. Again, much like snow skiing or guitar playing. I guess we have a lot of escapes, huh? But
well, speaking of escapes, I'll just ask you this briefly. Are your beloved New York Mets finished, and should they shut Jacob deGrom down for the season?
You gotta believe. All right?
Yeah.
You gotta believe. My mother was a Mets fan, so I was destined to become a Mets fan. She was also a Jets fan. So our hopes
are you.
Yeah. Our hopes are up. But, you know, it's funny. My father didn't really like sports, but my mother was she followed baseball and football. I think she was in love with Joe Namath, to be honest with you. But no, it's you got to believe you never give up. And this is what I tell kids: don't ever give up on anything. I would never give up on my team,
right?
Unless they're the Orioles, but
yeah, that's pretty bad. Jim, let me ask you this: I know it's hard to put one particular thing into a 35-year career, but if there's one thing you're most proud of as an educator, just one that you could think of, what would you say was the thing you're most proud about?
That's a really hard question.
We could, I mean, how about
So
rewarding?
it's not a thing. It's not a
Yeah.
thing. The most rewarding aspect of what we do involves taking a kid, a student, and I don't want to see, well, and bringing them to a level or a place where that they didn't think they were capable of. One of the things I always say in Seymour, and I may have even said this back in Derby, is that every student is more capable than they believe themselves to be, right? So there are students throughout my career that are highlights, and I'm not going to say any names out of respect, but because they necessarily weren't on the best path, and that by working with them as a community, getting them to a point in their life that they did never even envision themselves to be in, to successfully. And I think the most moving and greatest aspect of being an educator in general is getting kids to a successful future, regardless of what that might be. And it doesn't necessarily mean college. It can mean, going to technical schools, going into a job and being successful. It's those are the wins. Is when most kids could do it on their own, but some kids need help.
Right.
And the kids that need help, when you can get them there, that's incredibly rewarding, and there's nothing else like it.
Right. Well, Jim, I really enjoyed this. And first off, I want to thank you because, like I've said many times, growing up in Derby and then going to Derby High School is people like you that, really helped me, be where I am today. And I really do thank you for that. And, you're just an outstanding teacher, but an even better person. And I really do admire everything you've done for these 35 years. And I think, when the day comes and you're not in education anymore, that's going to be a sad day for education. And thank you for everything.
It'll be a good day for park rangering, though.
Yeah, that's true.
No, it's been a pleasure. The community, the Lower Naugatuck Valley, has been very supportive, and it's been fantastic to work there. It's really my professional home, and it's where I have most personal connections with people. And I've enjoyed thoroughly working both there in Derby and in Seymour.
Well, that's awesome. And I really do appreciate this. This was a lot of fun. And again, congratulations on a great career. Congratulations on, raising 3 wonderful kids, having a wonderful wife. And I really do, admire you for everything. And, thank you again for coming on.
Well, my pleasure, Michael. You have a good evening, and thanks for having me. But honestly, there's more hometown heroes than myself. I think you should actually host a show with Charles DeCenzo and Paul Sponheimer. Have them talk old days.
I actually had them both on, believe it or not.
Oh, did you? Oh,
yeah,
I
had them on solo, and then I had them on together with 2 other people. So that
must have been fun. That must have been fun.
Yeah. But
all right, Mike.
Thank you.
You have a good one. Bye-bye.
You as well. Well, there you have it, folks. I mentioned before that I had Jim Freund as a teacher in 1992. I met him in 1991. And, I always remember him as a guy who could always crack a joke. And, he had that quick wit and great sense of humor. But as time went on, I saw what he was really about. And more than anything else, he was about his students. And that was what he gave every single day, 100% to his students. Even if a kid got a few bad grades on a test, he wasn't going to let that kid quit. He wasn't going to let them just say, okay, I'm not a good student. He would stay after school, help them, and do whatever he could to make them better students and to show them that they could they could be good students and not to ever give up on themselves. He's carried that over for 35 years. You've seen what he's done in Derby. You see what he's doing now in Seymour. And he's just a remarkable human being who has a heart of gold, and he cares about the students he works with, the educators he works with. I mean, he is just a class act gentleman all the way. And if you ever had the fortune of having him as a teacher or a principal, you are a very lucky person, because everybody needs a Jim Freund in their school. For Hometown Heroes, I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.